April 16th, 1945. A clear spring morning in central Germany. If you had stood on the road leading out of the city of Weimar that day, you would have witnessed something unusual, a procession. Hundreds of civilians walking slowly uphill. Men in tailored suits and polished shoes. Women in elegant coats, hats carefully placed, gloves buttoned at the wrist. They looked as though they were headed to a concert or perhaps an afternoon gathering in the countryside. Some were talking quietly. Some appeared irritated. A few even smiled, as if this were an inconvenience rather than an event. They were the educated class of Weimar. Professors, businessmen, officials, the cultural elite of one of Germany's most celebrated cities. But this was no social outing. Flanking them on both sides were American soldiers, uniforms stained from weeks at the front, rifles carried at the ready, faces set and unsmiling. The soldiers were not there as escorts. They were there to ensure that no one turned back. The civilians had been informed they were going for a walk, 5 miles, up the wooded Ettersberg hill, to visit a place they insisted they knew nothing about, a place that had operated there for nearly 8 years. By the time they reached the gates, the smell in the air would make denial impossible. This is the story of what happened when a city devoted to culture was forced to confront what stood in its shadow. To understand what happened that day, you first have to understand the city itself. Weimar was not just another German town. It was a symbol, the city of Goethe, the city of Schiller, a place of theaters, libraries, manicured parks, and philosophy. For generations, it had been presented as the cultural heart of Germany. Music drifted from concert halls. Students debated literature in cafes. Visitors came to walk in the footsteps of poets. The people who lived there prided themselves on refinement, on education, on civilization. And yet, just 5 miles away, up a quiet, tree-lined road, stood a different institution. One that did not appear on postcards. One that was not mentioned in guidebooks. The concentration camp of Buchenwald had been established in 1937. For 8 years it operated on the slopes of the Ettersberg Hill. Prisoners arrived by train. Smoke rose regularly from the crematorium. Guards commuted back and forth. Some lived in comfortable houses not far from the city. Their families shopped in town. They attended the same performances, walked the same streets. When American forces approached the region in April 1945, the Assis began to flee. On April 11th, prisoners inside the camp organized and took control before U.S. troops fully secured the area. What the soldiers discovered inside was overwhelming. Thousands of prisoners were still alive. Thousands more were not. The camp was crowded with evidence of systematic brutality, starvation, disease, forced labor, execution. General George Patton arrived shortly after the liberation. He had already seen another camp at Ohrdruf. He believed he understood what to expect. Buchenwald proved otherwise. The scale, the condition of the survivors, the piles of bodies awaiting burial. It was something beyond conventional warfare. Patton later wrote that he felt physically ill. From the hill, the city of Weimar was visible in the distance. Fields were being worked. Laundry hung in the breeze. Civilian life continued. When asked whether the citizens knew what had been happening so close to their homes, the answer that came back was consistent. They claimed they did not. Patton did not accept that explanation. He turned to his staff and gave an order that was as deliberate as it was unusual. He did not want a symbolic visit from a minor official. He wanted the city's most respected citizens, the professors, the lawyers, the businessmen, the wives of senior administrators, the people whose education and status defined Weimar's identity. They were to be assembled and brought to the camp. Military police entered the city that same day. They knocked on doors along quiet, tree-lined streets. They stepped into offices and private homes. The instruction was simple. You are required to accompany us. Bring your coat. You will be walking. There was confusion. Some protested. A few insisted there must be a mistake. Others asked how long this would take, whether it was necessary, whether their professional standing had been taken into account. The answers were brief. It was necessary. It would take as long as required. Their standing was irrelevant. Within hours, a column began to form on the road leading out of Weimar. They were well dressed. Many had dressed carefully, as if appearing in public still required a certain presentation. American soldiers positioned themselves on both sides of the group. Vehicles followed behind to ensure no one fell back or turned away. The march began. At first, the mood remained restrained. Conversations continued in low tones. Some treated the event as an unpleasant formality. A few appeared skeptical, convinced that whatever awaited them would confirm their claim that they had known nothing substantial. The road curved upward through the trees of the Ettersberg. The higher they climbed, the quieter the column became. Before the gates came into view, the wind shifted. The smell reached them first. It was heavy and pervasive, settling into the air and clinging to clothing. Handkerchiefs were raised. Faces tightened. Steps slowed. The soldiers instructed them to continue. Then the iron gate appeared ahead. Beyond it stood the camp they said they did not know. They were ordered to enter. Inside, the scale of what had been hidden in plain sight became impossible to ignore. Prisoners who had survived stood behind wire and watched in silence as the citizens walked past. Their faces were gaunt, their movements slow. They did not shout. They did not approach. They simply looked. The Americans directed the group toward the crematorium area. Bodies awaiting burial remained visible in the open. The evidence had not been cleared away. It had been preserved as found. This was not rumor. It was not distant frontline combat. It was the result of years of operation on the hill overlooking their city. From certain points inside the camp, the rooftops of Weimar could still be seen in the distance. No one in the column was speaking now. The group was guided further inside the camp. They were not rushed. The Americans wanted them to see clearly. To walk the same paths the prisoners had walked. To stand where the guards had stood. Wooden barracks lined the compound, their doors open. Inside, bunks stacked 3 levels high revealed how many men had been forced into spaces built for far fewer. Blankets lay crumpled. Personal belongings, what little there had been, remained scattered. The civilians were instructed to look inside. Some hesitated at the threshold. Others stepped forward briefly and then withdrew. The air inside the barracks was stale, heavy with sickness. The Americans said little. They did not need to narrate what was visible. The tour continued toward the medical block and the crematorium. Here the evidence became more direct. Records, instruments, storage rooms, signs of a system that had operated methodically. Outside, bodies still awaited burial. Survivors moved slowly under supervision, assisting where they could. The civilians were told that many of the dead had perished in the final weeks, as food supplies collapsed and evacuations failed. A former prisoner approached the group under guard. He spoke quietly but firmly, addressing no one in particular. He described the daily routine, the roll calls, the punishments, the hunger. He gestured toward the hill beyond the camp fence, toward the direction of the city. He said the smoke had been visible for years. No one interrupted him. Several of the civilians lowered their eyes. Others stared fixedly at the ground. A few began to weep openly. Whether from shock, shame, disbelief, or some combination of all three, it was impossible to tell. The Americans made it clear that this was not a symbolic gesture. The citizens were required to walk through the grounds. They were required to observe. In some cases, they were assigned to assist in the burial of the dead. The confrontation was meant to be practical, not abstract. By the time the tour ended, the earlier composure had disappeared. The column that reformed near the gate no longer resembled the one that had set out from Weimar that morning. There were no conversations now, no irritation, no visible indignation. The walk back down the hill was silent. From the camp road, the city still looked unchanged. The same rooftops, the same church towers, the same quiet streets. But for those who had entered the gates, the distance between the city and the camp no longer felt like 5 miles. It felt immeasurable. News of what had been uncovered at Buchenwald did not remain confined to the hill above Weimar. Reports moved quickly through Allied command. Photographs were taken. Statements were recorded. What had been discovered was not treated as an isolated atrocity, but as evidence of a system that had operated across occupied Europe. When General Dwight D. Eisenhower was informed in detail of the conditions inside the camps, he made a deliberate decision. He ordered that members of Congress, journalists, and civilian leaders be brought to witness the sites themselves. He understood that descriptions alone would not be enough. The scale and nature of what had occurred required direct testimony. In a message sent shortly after visiting another camp, Eisenhower explained that he wanted to be in a position to give first-hand evidence should anyone in the future attempt to dismiss the reports as exaggeration or propaganda. The documentation was intentional. The visits were intentional. The presence of witnesses was intentional. The confrontation at Weimar was part of that broader effort. The objective was not vengeance, it was exposure. The events on the Ettersberg hill were no longer to be hidden behind distance, denial, or uncertainty. They were to be seen, recorded, and remembered. In the days that followed, the story spread beyond Germany. Newspapers printed photographs. Soldiers wrote letters home, describing what they had encountered. The narrative of the war began to include something that had not been fully understood by many outside Europe: the systematic nature of the camps. Back in Weimar, daily life resumed, at least outwardly. Shops reopened, streets filled, administrative structures remained in place, but the presence of the camp could no longer be separated from the identity of the city. It was part of its history now, documented and undeniable. The forced visit did not answer every question. It did not resolve the debate over how much civilians knew, or when they knew it. Some claimed ignorance to the end. Others admitted to rumors they had chosen not to investigate. The line between knowledge and willful blindness was not always clear. What was clear was this: the camp had existed within sight of a city that considered itself enlightened. Smoke had risen above the trees. Trains had arrived. Guards had commuted. The proximity was not theoretical. It was geographical. The march up the hill had lasted only a few hours. The memory of it would last far longer, and the question it raised would extend far beyond Weimar. When evidence stands close enough to see, what responsibility belongs to those who choose not to look? History would later return often to that image: the citizens of a celebrated cultural city walking through the gates of a concentration camp that had operated within sight of their homes. The moment became symbolic, not because it solved the question of guilt, but because it exposed the fragility of denial. The people who walked up the Ettersberg that morning were not camp guards. They were not SS officers. Most had not held weapons. Their defense rested on a simpler claim. They did not know. They had heard rumors, perhaps. They had seen smoke. They had noticed trains, but they had chosen ordinary explanations. A factory, a military installation, wartime secrecy. War creates distance, even at close range. It allows people to compartmentalize, to separate daily life from what happens behind fences and beyond trees. In Weimar, culture had continued. Concerts had been performed. Books had been read. Children had gone to school. And 5 miles away, another reality had unfolded. The march did not transform the past. It did not bring back the dead. It did not resolve the debate over how much was known and by whom. But it removed the possibility of saying, from that day forward, that nothing had been seen. For the American command, the purpose had been clear: documentation, confrontation, memory. For the civilians, the experience was something else entirely: a forced proximity, an encounter with evidence that could not be explained away. From the slopes of the Ettersberg, the rooftops of Weimar remained visible. The city did not disappear. It remained where it had always been. The difference was that the separation between the city and the camp could no longer be imagined as distance. It had always been 5 miles. The question that lingered after April 1945 was not only what the citizens knew, it was what responsibility belongs to those who live within sight of injustice and choose not to ask what stands beyond the trees. That question did not end with the war. It remains wherever denial becomes easier than acknowledgement.